Every once in a while, we get photographs in a viral story of these guys. Monkeys just chilling in a hot spring with their eyes closed, snow on their heads, looking like they just discovered the meaning of life. And obviously, monkeys in nature's hot tub fits internet virality about as well as peanut butter does jelly. So memes were made, backgrounds set, calendars printed, and everyone pretty much agreed. Nature is beautiful and oh so adorable. But here's what that photo doesn't show you. Monkeys likely sitting just outside of the shot in the freezing weather because they weren't allowed in the water. Welcome to the world of Macaca fuscata, also known as the Japanese macaw or snow monkey. Though after what I'm about to tell you, you might want to call them something a little bit less cutesy. Now, these aren't just monkeys that happen to live in the snow. These are basically one of the only primates that do so on a very frequent basis, being able to chill in temperatures of minus 20 degrees Celsius or minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. No pun intended. Which, just for those who are unaccustomed to icy weather, is cold enough to cause frostbite in exposed skin within 30 minutes. And so considering this, they are unsurprisingly the most northern living primate in the world, besides us, with the Shimokita Peninsula, their northernmost range, being only 50 miles or 80 kilometers from Russia, and is about the same latitude as New York City, except instead of giant rats and pizza, you get 11 feet or 3.5 meters of annual snowfall, in winters that last 6 months. And yet, that monkey soaking in the hot spring, it's not there because it needs it. It's there because it wants it. So, suffice to say, Japanese macaws shouldn't exist where they do. Every rule of primate evolution basically says so. I mean, primates evolved in warm climates, with our entire lineage essentially being built for tropical and subtropical ecosystems. For example, large brains need consistent calories, which is harder to support when half the year nature decides to pretty much just shut off. And grasping hands and feet work better when they're not frozen solid. And yet, here we have a monkey that occupies everything from subtropical forests in Yakushima, where the humidity is so high that moss grows on literally everything, to the subarctic forests of northern Honshu, where the snow gets deep enough to bury a standing human many times over. I mean, we're essentially talking about a temperature range of 50 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the equivalent of the same species thriving in both Florida and Norway. And so unsurprisingly, given their hardiness, they're pretty widespread, being found on 3 of Japan's 4 main islands, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, as well as several smaller islands. In fact, the only major island they don't inhabit is Hokkaido, and that's not because they couldn't handle it, just that they never managed to cross the Tsugaru Strait. Give them a land bridge, and they'd probably be able to colonize Siberia, to be honest. Oh, and if that wasn't impressive enough, in 1972, a group of 115 Japanese macaws were relocated from Japan to a 186-acre ranch in southern Texas. And while many did die as they got acclimated to the new environment and dangers, many also went on to survive and eventually thrive. And by 1995, there were about 500 of them. And so today, there's a healthy population of Japanese macaw living in what is literally one of the hottest places in the US, despite being the most cold-adapted primate in the world. Which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But here's where things get properly weird. Despite them being these incredible phenomena in primate evolution, according to genetic analysis, Japanese macaws only split from the rhesus macaws about 1 million years ago, which in evolutionary terms is nothing, being similar to the divergence of time between us and Neanderthals. And what's interesting is that the genetic evidence also shows what scientists call star-like phylogeny, meaning instead of the gradual branching you expect over millions of years, these monkeys appeared essentially everywhere at once. No gradual radiation pattern, just boom, monkeys everywhere except Hokkaido. And this all happened because sometime during the Middle Pleistocene, when sea levels dropped, a land bridge was likely created between Korea and Japan, allowing for a small group of macaws to cross, where they then exploded across the archipelago like an invasive species on steroids, and thus trapping them in this winter wonderland. Which, speaking of a winter wonderland, remember how I said these snow monkeys live in areas that reach minus 20 degrees Celsius or minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, let me ask you this. Do you know what this sort of temperature normally does to a primate's body? Because it's not pretty. And to understand this, let's imagine you were suddenly teleported butt naked into this kind of environment. The first thing that happens, besides you freaking out from getting magicked away, is that your blood vessels will also join you in this panic. You see, every vessel in your skin and extremities will slam shut like someone's trying to break into your house. Your body's frantically shoving all the blood towards your core, which is why your fingers go from pink to white to I'm screwed in minutes. And your ears, nose, toes, and basically anything else sticking out are basically abandoned by your circulatory system. Kind of like it's too hot to handle, but the opposite. And it's your extremities, which just got voted off the show. Within a few minutes, the shivering starts. And not the kind of cute, oh it's chilly shivering, but rather the violent, uncontrollable muscle spasms that jack your metabolism up 500%, as your body desperately tries to generate heat. But here's the thing, without fur or clothing, all that heat you're making, it's gone before it even matters. You're burning energy like an oven with the door open. And then meanwhile, as you start freaking out more and hyperventilating, every breath you take will actively try to kill you. Kind of. That rapid breathing combined with a minus 20 degrees Celsius air hits your respiratory system, and your airways go, absolutely not, and start clamping down. Your bronchi constrict, breathing becomes somewhat painful, and you're basically drowning in air that's too cold to process. After that, your nerves start shutting down, with the cold literally slowing the electrical signals in your body. Your fingers won't do what your brain tells them, you can't zip a zipper, can't tie a knot, can't even make a proper fist. And then the numbness hits. And not some sort of peaceful numbness, unless we're talking about your resignation to your fate to being teleported butt naked into the freezing cold, but rather the kind where you know something terrible is happening, but you can't feel it anymore. And this is when frostbite enters the chat. And you see, a lot of people don't understand what frostbite truly is, besides that's when cold stuff hurts your body, more or less. But it's much more sinister than that, and much more gruesome too, as frostbite is basically when your own cells start to freeze, with ice crystals even starting to form if you wait too long. And this process begins relatively quickly. Frost nip will hit in minutes, and full frostbite can occur in less than 30. And at that point, your fingers aren't fingers anymore. They're meat popsicles. Congratulations. And after 30 minutes, if you're still standing around, your core temperature starts dropping below 37 degrees Celsius, or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. At 35 degrees Celsius, or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you're shivering so hard you can't speak properly. At 32 degrees Celsius, or 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit, you're not only confused, you're also slurring like you're hammered. And when below that, well, something strange happens. And this is also the really messed up part. You see, the shivering stops. Not because you're warming up, but because your body has given up. And with this failure also comes the failure to hold all that blood in your core, causing it to suddenly rush back out into the rest of your body. And let's just say that's not comfortable. In fact, it is so uncomfortable that it, along with your brain not working properly, is why many people who die from freezing are found with their clothes stripped off, because the return of the heat is so uncomfortable that it feels like they're literally burning up, hence the stripping. And if you're at this point, you're basically beyond screwed. The cold has turned your cardiac muscle, or heart, into a malfunctioning pump that can't maintain rhythm, and so arrhythmias kick in, which eventually lead to cardiac arrest, and thus death. And so, this is what minus 20 degrees Celsius, or minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, does to a normal primate within hours. Total system failure. But of course, the Japanese macaques are anything but normal. They maintain a healthy core body temperature in environments that would cause rapid death in others. And of course, as you probably can see, a big help here is their fur, having among the densest fur of all primates, as well as the densest out of all species of macaque. And it's actually so well adapted that it will even change in accordance to the temperature outside, with it not only becoming thicker in winter, but also with northern populations having a higher density baseline on top of that. And so unsurprisingly, a study found that if you shave a Japanese macaque, it has to dramatically increase its metabolism just to maintain body temperature, with heat production nearly doubling in clipped animals compared to their unclipped counterparts, even at just 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, perhaps a bit more surprising than their fur, another thing that helps them is their size, as Japanese macaques are significantly larger than their mainland relatives, with the average male rhesus macaque weighing only around 7.7 kilograms, or 17 pounds, while Japanese macaque males, on the other hand, reach an average of 11.3 kilograms, or 25 pounds. So not huge overall when compared to the likes of a gorilla, orangutan, or even us, but still massive relatively compared to their cousin, being about 45% bigger. And here's the thing, northern Japanese macaques are even more massive than that, being significantly larger than the southern ones. And the reason for these size differences is actually quite straightforward. You see, there's a rule called Bergmann's Rule, which basically states that animal populations in colder climates tend to be larger than their relatives in warmer climates because a larger body reduces the surface area to volume ratio, which thus helps conserve heat. And apparently, these monkeys follow that rule religiously. And then, just as an add-on to the thick fur and bigger sizes, they have this cute little short stumpy tail, which is only about 3 inches or 8 centimeters long, essentially being useless for balance or grasping, unlike what's seen in most other monkeys, with their mainland relatives having a tail that's literally 3 times longer. But guess what? This is also an adaptation to the cold, as less exposed area means less heat loss. And it also happens to be great for hydrodynamics, which is perfect because they apparently love swimming. And I don't just mean little hot tub bathing that they sometimes get up to, as these guys can really swim. with them having been documented swimming more than half a kilometer or 0.3 miles in the wild. And so, this is interesting and all, but what really keeps scientists up at night isn't their size or swimming ability, but rather the fact that these monkeys are getting smarter. Kind of. As I don't mean their brains are getting bigger over time, but rather they're getting smarter from what I would call cultural integration, showing a level of behavioral flexibility that is very surprising considering that they're not only a non-human primate, but they're also not even an ape primate. You see, macaws in general, and as an extension Japanese macaws, are an intelligent group. Their frontal cortex, the part associated with planning and decision-making, is quite well developed, and in problem-solving tests, they've shown abilities comparable to great apes, with one study even finding that they could learn to use tools not just through trial and error, but rather by simply observing others. And so, this has led to at least partial interest into if macaws possess a basic form of what researchers carefully call theory of mind, the ability to understand that others had different knowledge and perspectives. And we can also observe this with how a subordinate monkey will not just simply wait for a dominant monkey to be done eating its food to get its own food, but rather until it just stops looking. They'll deceive, misdirect, and manipulate, understanding not just what others do, but what others know. And as a result, the macaw has been involved in many studies concerning neuroscience, as their brains are complex and can serve as a proxy model to human ones. And I think a great example of this complexity is an observation made in the 1950s, when researchers on Koshima Island started feeding the local troop sweet potatoes on the beach. And as is typical of things falling to the sand, the potatoes got covered in it. But of course, like any self-respecting monkey, they couldn't turn down a good yam even if it was slightly gritty. But one guy, or rather girl, decided that enough was enough, and was not impressed with this sandy offering, as this then young female, named Emo, would instead take the sweet potatoey goodness and walk to the ocean to dip hers in the water, effectively washing the sand off. And within a few months, her mother caught on, and then within a year, the monkeys she interacted with on a regular basis also joined in. And after a while, more and more members of her troop started to copy this altogether. And eventually this trait was passed on from member to member until eventually all except the oldest monkeys were washing their sweet potatoes. And what's also interesting is that over time, some of the monkeys apparently enjoyed the first bite so much that they started dipping the already clean potato in seawater between every bite. In other words, seasoning it. And so it's already pretty remarkable that these guys basically became the Gordon Ramsay of the monkey world, but this troop, or more so Emo, wasn't done just yet, as she similarly founded the next practice as well, which was to bunch up wheat grains, which were covered in dirt, and then throw it into the water, whereupon she'd wait for the wheat to float back up, which was now free from the soil, and oh so scrumptious for her very refined palate. And just like the last time, the others were like, yeah, it kinda slaps not eating dirt. And thus, it spread through the troop like wildfire. And funnily enough, an altered misaccount of this incident is actually the basis for the 100th monkey effect, which is essentially some new age nonsense about practices spreading through a species through a shared consciousness. Yeah. But the truth is actually much more interesting and less mumbo-jumbo, which is just that these monkeys have culture, and I mean that literally. You see, the macaw has other unusual behaviors which are only found in different populations, such as actually the iconic bathing in hot springs, as well as rolling snowballs for fun. And the truly weird part of this is that this extends not just to behavior, but also to language, so to speak, with the researchers finding the macaws in different areas have different frequencies and pitches in their cues, which is their form of communication. And when researchers played calls different from their own, monkeys would then modulate theirs to better match the previous one. In other words, adapting. And then, in 2015, Kyoto University researchers announced that they found social customs differed by regions too, with populations having different shows of physical affection. For example, some groups had more elaborate hugs, and others a rudimentary form of massage, or as the researchers so scientifically put it, kneading another's fur by rhythmically opening and closing the palm. So yeah, a massage. And so, with displays of behavior and intelligence so complex, it's probably not surprising to hear that the macaw's social system is a whole other beast. Now, if you're observant, you might have noticed two different things I mentioned. One, that groups of macaws are called troops, and two, that some of them can be massive, with the one relocated to Texas having had more than 150 members, which is comparable to that of chimpanzees. But that's not even the largest, with some troops having been recorded with a population of over 650. And while this massive number is interesting by itself, what's particularly odd is the fact that the entire system runs a matrilineal inheritance, but with a twist. That kinda makes no sense, which is that younger daughters outrank the older ones. In other words, the absolute nightmare of older siblings. I mean, imagine being the firstborn and then watching your baby sister automatically outranking you at birth while vomiting, pooping, and peeing everywhere and not even knowing how to walk. Yeah. And yet, that's macaw society. And since it's a matrilineal society, it means that females never leave. They're born into their mother's troop, and they die in their mother's troop. And since rank is also inherited, if your mom is high-ranking, well, congratulations, you are essentially nobility. But if your mom is at the bottom, well, welcome to a lifetime of eating last and getting the worst sleeping spots. Not to mention less bathing time, but we'll get to that later. On the flip side, males don't inherit anything at all. And in fact, once they hit puberty, which is around 5 years old, they get shown the door, and not metaphorically, literally having to leave. And it's not like some quick transition where they find a new troop and settle down, as these guys often spend years living outside of any troop, either completely alone or in an all-male gang of rejects, with some having to travel over 100 kilometers just to find a new home. Which, to put that into perspective, is like getting kicked out of your house in Philadelphia and then having to walk to New York to find a new family. So maybe not as bad as Will Smith's ordeal, but it's up there. And get this, when a male finally manages to join a new troop, he usually enters at rock bottom, being the lowest of the low. And so obviously he has to work his way up. But let's just say there are no shortcuts, literally, as the way to do so is time itself. In other words, the longer you've been in a troop, the higher your rank tends to be, which is essentially due to rankings based in large part by age. And the higher the rank you are, the more you get, if you catch my drift. But here is where it gets interesting, and maybe depressing if you're part of the resident males. Because not all males play by these rules. In fact, about 41% of observed matings involve quote-unquote visitor males. In other words, guys who aren't even members of the troop, who basically just show up during mating season, steal your girls, get busy, and then leave. And what's crazy is that some of these visitors are actually more successful at fathering offspring than their resident males, who are, there all the time. In fact, there was even one visitor in Shotoshima who was the top baby daddy for 2 years running without ever officially joining the troop. The man's just built different, I guess. But regardless, being on top is definitely where you want to be. And so unsurprisingly, there are often conflicts between males to establish themselves as head honcho. And it gets pretty violent, with actually the main method of alpha succession being either when the previous alpha leaves, which I can't imagine is done willingly, or dies. So pretty hardcore. But what really sucks is that it's not even the monkeys fighting for the top that need to be worried, as there are documented cases of lone young males getting killed by others simply because they were trying to join, period. Not even steal their girls. And in one documented case from Kinkazon Island, a young male trying to join a troop was attacked by the resident males for over an hour, during which he literally fled into the freezing ocean to escape, and subsequently died of hypothermia. So in other words, he chose an ice-cold ocean with who knows what sort of other dangers over the other males. Let that sink in. But, with all this said, even though there is a male hierarchy, it's actually females who choose their partners, and sometimes that does actually happen to be a low-ranked male. And the system that they use is called consortship. The way it works is that a male and female will pair up, eating together, traveling together, grooming each other, etc., for an average of 16 days. So essentially, they're married for 2 weeks. And then at the end of the period, she moves on to the next male, with the average female mating with over 4 different males per season. But like I said, it's speed dating with a side of violence. And so males will guard their temporary wives, following them constantly and fighting off rivals that approach. And it's mainly through this that being high-ranking is a good thing, as high-ranking males can maintain consortships longer, and will actively interfere with lower-ranking males' attempts at romance. Just kinda messed up. And that might sound sucky for everyone involved, but what I can say is that at least they're not like their mainland relatives, the rhesus macaw, who has a somewhat similar structure in that females choose their mates, but with the added terrifying fact that if a male is not interested, the female monkeys have been known to retaliate for this perceived slight. And they do this by biting off fingers and damaging their genitals. And no, I'm not kidding. But anyways, back to the Japanese macaws, both males and females undergo dramatic physical changes during this time, with their faces and genitals turning bright red, and the males' tails stand erect, no pun intended, in order to better display their scarlet junk. So in other words, red equals horny. And so with everything said, you might think that with all this fighting, hierarchies, and sexual politics, that these monkeys would spend most of their time at each other's throats. But as it so turns out, you actually need to put in some effort to keep a complex society together. And so Japanese macaws actually spend 20% of their waking hours doing something that looks downright wholesome, grooming each other. So in other words, that's hours a day just picking through each other's fur and generally being all cutesy and stuff. But before you go, aw, how sweet, let me stop you right there. Because this is not about hygiene, and it's not about being nice. It's about politics. I know, the forbidden P word. You see, the grooming patterns reveal the entire social structure. Mothers groom daughters, sisters groom sisters, etc. But female macaws also groom non-related individuals, using it as a method to build connections and alliances with others. and every single one of these grooming sessions is a calculated transaction, with females only grooming a limited number of individuals, even if the troop grows larger. And in typical Japanese macabre fashion, there are even different ways to groom one another, supposedly, with mothers passing on their own techniques to their daughters. But of course, on top of simply picking bugs out of each other's fur, Japanese macaques also have a complex vocal repertoire which differ depending on the situation. For example, gurney calls accompany grooming and work essentially as appeasement, while threat calls between macaques, on the other hand, are usually made not by the fighters themselves, but by their supporters, essentially friends yelling from the sidelines, "Yeah, beat his ass," and cheering on the fight. So some things are just universal, I guess. But what isn't universal, at least among these snow monkeys, is their love for hot springs. I know, you've been deceived, as this is actually another one of those cultural traits. And the story goes like this. A young female macaque waded into the hot springs one day out of curiosity, maybe because she saw people do it, and surprise, surprise, monkey likes jacuzzi. And eventually this behavior spread to the rest of the troop, where after generations it eventually became ubiquitous. And since then, the monkeys have lived happily ever after, enjoying Mother Nature's hot tub. Except, that's a lie. Because just like everything else in this Song of Ice and Monkey, politics and hierarchy dominate everything. And so unsurprisingly, access to the hot tub is restricted, with the dominant female, her line, and other high-ranking females reaping most of the benefits. And in fact, the usage difference is so significant that scientists were able to detect altered levels of stress hormones between the high-ranking members, who bathed, and the lower-ranking ones who had less access. So truly, a game of hot tubs. And so with all of this said, given how iconic this animal is, and all of their quirky tendencies, it's probably not surprising to hear that they're also a bit of a cultural phenomena in the human sense. I mean, you probably heard of the expression, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And that actually comes from Japan. And there's a very famous carving on a temple that depicts this. And yes, those are Japanese macaques. In fact, the very reason we have those monkey emojis covering their eyes, ears, and mouth is because of the original. And funnily enough, when the Japanese joke about someone being impulsive or overly sexual, it's usually a monkey reference, as opposed to in the US where we talk about breeding like rabbits, or being a horn dog. But in Japan, it's monkeys. Even Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of the most important figures in Japanese history, and one of the three great unifiers of Japan, was nicknamed Kozaru, meaning the little monkey. Probably half as an insult about his appearance, and probably half just accurate. And there are numerous other stories, legends, and even spiritual figures that ultimately originated at least in part with these hot tub-loving monkeys. But this cultural familiarity has hidden something important, which is that these aren't some cute forest spirits or wise temple guardians. They're complex, politically sophisticated, and sometimes violent animals that happen to share the same country with humans. And that relationship is getting worse. You see, during World War II, monkeys were drastically overhunted, both for food and medical supplies, which in turn caused the species to become locally extinct across several regions. But thankfully, the Japanese government reacted to this and labeled them endangered and banned hunting of them in 1947. And unsurprisingly, given how prolific and tough these little guys are, the population, which had dangerously dropped, then exploded. And today there are over 100,000 of them in Japan. And because they have no natural predators left, with the Japanese wolves going extinct in the early 20th century, they're expanding into human territory. And when I say expanding, I mean conquering. In July 2022, in Yamaguchi City, macaques attacked at least 66 people over a few weeks. Not threatened, not screeched at, full-on attacked, with them specifically targeting children and elderly people. And what's crazy is that they didn't just attack people outside, they also figured out how to enter people's homes, getting in through windows and sliding doors. And mind you, these were not open windows and doors we're talking about. They're the ones who made them open. In fact, there was even one incident involving a monkey breaking into a house and going ape on a kid, no pun intended, with the father saying, and I quote, "I heard crying coming from the ground floor, so I hurried down. And then I saw a monkey hunching over my child." Yeah, that's nightmare fuel. Initially, authorities thought it was just one rogue monkey, and so they tranquilized it and killed it, believing that it was the culprit. But the attacks continued, and continued, and continued. And so what that implies, that it might have been an entire troop that suddenly decided that humans were targets. And remember what I said about them passing on their culture? Yeah, not great news. On top of that, rural damage is also a massive problem. In 2019 alone, agricultural damage from macaques totaled 900 million yen, or about $8 million. But hey, we really only have ourselves to blame for wiping out the one natural predator they had. But perhaps the moral of the story, beyond don't wipe out animals and ecosystems, is that things aren't always how they seem. As remember, that key picture in the story of the monkeys in the hot spring does not tell the whole story, with it certainly not mentioning those who were not allowed inside. that monkey sitting there in the hot tub is there because it fought for that spot, because its mother fought for that spot, because its grandmother fought for that spot, and so on. It's soaking what is essentially a million years of evolution that says comfort and resources belong to the powerful. And that is something we humans certainly share as well. But of course, that's only one side of the coin, so to speak. These monkeys also show compassion, they play together, innovate, and apparently solve problems in ways their ancestors likely never imagined, like opening windows to beat people up. So next time you see the annual appearance of the story about the Japanese snow monkey, think about what you're really looking at. A highly intelligent, politically sophisticated, culturally evolving red bud monkey, which is more than it seems. Thanks for watching, and until next time.